I'd like to welcome all of those that are listening to this video presentation, which we call Lessons from the Field. And this is an interview format video series featuring alumni and friends of the UIC College of Pharmacy. And we have a diverse array of guests who have a common thread of passion for pharmacy and pharmaceutical services and giving back. Today we're featuring Ricky Lee. Dr. Lee is a PharmD graduate from 2015. His current position is Director of PBM/Payer Strategy and Network Contracting for Costco Wholesale out of the Pacific Northwest, which is my home territory. I'll be asking Dr. Lee 6 questions today, and those 6 questions are designed to give some insight to from our guests on the career and experience that he's had since graduation for the benefit of our students, alumni, and friends. So let's go ahead and get started. Ricky, if we could start with just having you walk us through your career briefly in maybe 3 minutes or so.
Thank you, Dean Schumock. I don't think 3 minutes will be necessary. I don't have that much of a career history to go through. But I started out in pharmacy practice in pharmacy school, as most students do, or before that. And I worked at an independent up in Skokie, and I got that job as an intern just purely on the referral of another classmate. And I worked there for a little while, about a year, and I picked up a second job at CVS as an intern. And while I was working these 2 jobs, one of the staff pharmacists there said, "Hey, you work a lot. Do you want to be an intern at Costco? I'm going to Costco." And at that time, I had never shopped at Costco. I mean, I think Costco wasn't as big, maybe, 10 years ago as it is today, or maybe it was, and I just wasn't aware of it. But, I almost didn't go for it. I ended up applying, and I remember the wage was 50 cents less at Costco. And I remember saying, nah, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to make 50 cents less money, not having that future foresight. And I almost turned down the job. I ended up getting a comp raise for that 50 cent. Didn't matter because I graduated the next year and, they raised your rate. But I worked there for about 2 years until I hit graduation. And with graduation, like most students, you kind of get stuck in a position thinking, what are you going to do? And I had done the MSHI informatics degree along with the PharmD. That's why I always tell people it took me 5 years to graduate, but it's not because I failed anything. But I was deciding between a fellowship at the VA and staying with Costco. It was a 2-year fellowship, and I was short on cash, so that made the decision really easy. So I ended up working at Costco and just kind of floating around the Chicagoland. And I met a lot of great pharmacists and made great friends with some of the regionals and some of the managers, and just floating around the Chicago market. And eventually the pharmacy manager spot opened up in Kirkland, Washington. At the time, I was thinking, Kirkland's a flagship store. It's pretty far away, but it's pretty close to the corporate office, so it might help me get some exposure. And when I got that position, I was encouraged by supervisors and managers there to really build it into the pharmacy that ideally you'd imagine. And they gave me the resources to do so, and we did. And over the next 3 years, we built it into a very successful pharmacy, and some of the initiatives caught on. And it helped me basically get the role I have today. So that's a synopsis from P3 year till P2 year till about today.
Well, thank you. A lot of people really love Costco, including myself. I enjoy going there and shopping. And it sounds like from what you just relayed to us that how you got started at Costco was referral from a friend or really a network influence. And so I thought maybe I'd ask over your career with Costco, how has networking and the relationships that you've developed played a part in your progression in the company?
Yeah. Costco, is a very, very unique culture. It might be different than a lot of other companies. And I guess, every company has its own culture, what they value, the ethics. And actually, I think every Costco, if you walk in somewhere in the building, there's going to be this giant placard. It's got our code of ethics and our values. And it really highlights, it's very simple, it's 5 sentences long, and it just highlights what the company is all about. You know, and when I was working in Costco, I mean, first to get into Costco, it was a straight networking. You know, I had known the staff pharmacist at one of the pharmacies, at the CVS pharmacies I worked at. She encouraged me to apply to get to Costco because she was making the transition. You know, I did that, and you know, met a lot of people, a lot of pharmacists along the way that were managing stores, seeing what they were doing, seeing what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong from my perspective. You know, not necessarily criticize, but just to understand what they had seen as opportunities in the market and what they had seen as shortcomings. And everybody, you know, in pharmacy or actually any profession will tell you, you know, very honestly what they think are the opportunities, what they think are the shortcomings that they have, especially ones that manage retail businesses. I mean, it's a retail business itself is a razor thin margins, tough competitive environment. You know, if you don't fight for it, somebody else will come and eat your lunch. So being from that environment and knowing a lot of the pharmacists and how we do business, you know, it gave me a lot of great contacts, people I could reach out to. You know, when I was a pharmacy manager in Kirkland, I'd reach out to the pharmacy managers in Chicago market. You know, you've been doing this for 20 years. You know, what's the number one thing that you could do personnel wise? What's the number one thing you could do, you know, for your merchandising or whatever? And everybody's got a little bit of tidbits of knowledge and little pearls, right, that we call them. And you just take it and you just do your best to implement it. And not everything's going to catch on the same way in the Midwest as it will in the Northwest, but overall, you kind of get the sense of what you're doing based on your network contacts. And you know, I remember in the Dean's Forum, one of the things, I think I shared this story with you, one of the reasons I love the Dean's Forum so much, there was that speaker that encouraged us to, you know, email and reach out to the folks at the very top of the organization that you work for or want to work for, and just have a conversation, nothing serious, nothing too big of a deal. And I don't know if that day I had like an extra Red Bull or something, but I was like motivated to just basically do that. So I did, and I shot an email to the top guy, one of the top guys at Costco, and had a conversation with him. Was pleasantly happy, you know, surprised he answered me and excited to have that conversation. That was P3 year, and every year for the next year, I pretty much just kept in touch. And 4 years later, when this job opened up, you know, I look at the posting and I'm like, it reports to this guy that I've been talking to for the last 4 years. So it's great. I walk into the interview, you know, we have a great interview. You know, it was a tough interview, but, and there was a lot of details in there, but I mean, having that relationship to begin with, I'm sure helped, and I'm sure was a benefit, not only for me, but also for him, because, you know, you kind of have a sense that this person, where they're coming from, what their work ethic is like, you know, what their ambition is and what their hopes are. And I think when you can do that before you get to the actual interview, because that's what you're generally trying to set up in the interview, you know, it makes the interview a lot more comfortable, especially for me, right? It's no longer a nerve-wracking experience. There's a lot of interviews, a lot of interviewees surely feel. So I definitely agree. You know, I wasn't the best networker in school, but over time, I've definitely learned to be better at it. And now my job actually entirely depends on it. and I definitely appreciate that P3 speaker in the Dean's Forum. Really helped.
Yeah, wow, what a great story. Really shows you the power of reaching out, networking, and how that can turn around and when you least expect it, really help you in your career.
You have nothing to lose. You know, I try and say that a lot to students that used to rotate with me in Kirkland. You have nothing to lose. You know, nobody's going to go out of your way to somehow make this a detriment to you. You can only win from it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, so you mentioned the Dean's Forum. A lot of our students take that during their time here. And I forgot to mention right behind me, I'm out in front of the College of Pharmacy. I just wanted to point out to you the building again. I know you've been gone for 5 years. I'm sure you want to come back and check out all the things we've changed. Let me move on to the next question. You know, talked a little bit about networking and how that has influenced your career. And I think, you know, any of our students would be impressed by the fact that over a fairly short period, you graduated in 2015, that you've moved up into a corporate position at Costco and obviously done very well for yourself. So for our current students, what advice do you have besides, you know, what you've already shared on how they can better prepare themselves for their careers and for, you know, being successful like you have?
It's very generous to say that I've been very successful. I strongly encourage everybody to have work experience. And I know it's tough in a lot of environments. And I was a P2 student, looking for that first position as well. And I'm sure that, recession that I graduated, undergrad into in 2010, same one that a lot of students are hitting right now, obviously a different scenario in terms of severity. But try to aim to have work experience. If not possible, utilize your externships as best as you can. Practically be able to talk at length about what you're passionate in. Really have that ability to kind of carry a conversation about, your interests and what you really want to do, and be able to set like a very clear objective for yourself. Over the next 5 years, I want to be this. Over the next 10 years, I want to accomplish this. And I know like 5 years, 10 years might not be too long for some people, but when you're looking back, everything goes by really damn fast. And when you're looking forward, everything goes by really damn slow. Like everybody's been counting the days since March, from this coronavirus. But when you're looking back, you're like, where'd those last 5 years go? I barely remember, I can remember a lot of it, but looking back, I feel like there's a ton of things just flew right by. And I'm sure that's going to feel the same way in the next 5 years, so definitely set some ambitious goals for yourself. Be really honest with yourself. And all of that doesn't have to be like a personal exercise. You don't have to sit sit in your room and look at the mirror. Sometimes the best and most honest advice comes from your friends and family and mentors, right? They're the ones who can spot your weaknesses the easiest. They're the ones who can spot your strengths, right? You can do this so well. You can do X, Y, and Z, but you really lack, this or that. And I see this and that in a lot of students. So having that honest advice, either internally or externally, or a mixture of both, super helpful. And on a practical note, definitely get good with presentations. I know when you're in school, you probably do a lot of PowerPoints and group activities. It's the same thing, in the world that we work in today. Business is, for better or worse, spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and team exercises. So get comfortable talking about, this type of activity, and be able to work with your colleagues in the way that basically perfected in school. And the most important thing from my perspective is to get comfortable as a pharmacist talking about costs. That's a pretty specific piece of advice. And the reason I say that is almost every pharmacist I know, when they talk about cost of a drug, or they talk about pricing to patients and to physicians and to, their friends and family, like, your grandparents will come up and be like, why is my Januvia X amount of dollars? It's a really specific question. But most pharmacists just take it as it is what it is. I don't know. It is what it is. That's the set amount by, the pharmacy or the PBM or whatever you want to call it. But all of this information is widely available online. You can really disseminate and be able to coherently explain how prices, copays, and tiers and contracts are set, and who sets them. And being able, you don't have to know the details, but having the capability to talk about that with some degree of accuracy, it's going to be enormously helpful to your career as a pharmacist and to your professional journey.
Well, that's great advice, Ricky. Of course, I'm a little partial to the last subject there, being the one who taught a pharmacoeconomics course for a while, which I'm sure you did very well in. So I think we've touched on this a little bit already with the networking and your story about the person that hired you in the corporate position. But are there others, either when you're in school or in your career, that have really influenced you, or other things that have helped inform you as you've moved forward in your career that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I'll give you both. By far, Dr. Nick Popovich has been the greatest personal influence on my career, as well as a lot of other folks. I can't claim any degree of ownership in that one, but it's serendipitous. When I applied into the GPPA program when I was a high school student, I applied for one college because I missed a deadline for U of I. So I applied to UIC GPPA for pharmacy. And I interviewed with Dr. Popovich. That was the person I interviewed with. And 4 years later, I go into pharmacy school and I meet him and develop a very, very close relationship with him. And it, from P1 to now, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies. There was a lot of serious struggles and challenges that I probably wouldn't have made it very far if I didn't have resources like Dr. P. He believed in me like he does with so many other students, and was able to help me build my network. He was able to provide a lot of guidance with soft skills, not just the stuff that we're learning in class. As much as I'd like to say I got every single thing out of a textbook, the reality is a lot of things come from your personal relationships and your development of those skills. So that's probably the most important personal influencer for my professional life. On the work experience side, the most unique thing, I guess, that kind of made me appreciate how payer networks and management got set up is I did this internship with the American Academy of Pediatrics out in Washington, D.C. I was a federal affairs intern, so they have an office out in Washington, D.C., keep close tabs on what's going on legislatively. There's a very deep connection between medical practice, healthcare systems, government sponsorships and fundings. A lot of these programs are based out of that Washington, D.C. Central hub. So in addition to discovering a passionate love for cheap Peruvian chicken meals, the experience that I got there really boosted my understanding of how our healthcare system is set up, and planted that kind of like seed of curiosity for my interest in how networks are arranged, and how the I guess the fundamental underpinnings of our healthcare system is structured. It wasn't too many on the detail side, but you understood the people who made the decisions, legislatively or at the top of associations. You kind of get a sense for how they operate and what they look at. They're always looking a decade out. They're always looking at what's pharmacy going to look like a decade out or 2 decades out. And that's a big difference from when you're looking as a student, because you're just thinking about graduation, right? You're just looking for your first job. You're just looking for your first paycheck to come in. So that's probably the most influential experience that I had.
Well, thank you. So people and experience sounds like if you were to sum it up. And thanks for mentioning Dr. Popovich. I mean, I think you probably know, since it sounds like you keep in contact with him, that he retired recently. And there's just so many students over the years that have had the same experience as you, and still look to him as a mentor. And the advice that he's given to all of them, I think, has really benefited a whole generation of pharmacists that are out there. So kudos to Dr. Popovich. And I think the comments about, getting that experience that you got in DC, but our students can get in many different settings, organizations, and that really can be very influential on how your career progresses. So thank you. Let me just take a little bit further and ask you, since you've been in your career, then, in order to stay on top of the game and to continue to progress, keep your skills sharp, what have you done to kind of continue to expand your knowledge and expertise and experiences as you've gone through your career?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Obviously, once you graduate, it's not the end of the learning journey. It's probably just gets exponentially harder because now there's financial consequences if you don't perform, right? So when you talk about growing your knowledge and expertise, I think the most important thing is to read a ton. And I know that seems like terrible, vague advice, but it really is reading a ton of information about PBMs, for me, about insurers, what CMS is doing, especially with stars ratings, right? That's a big component of how plans accumulate a ton of revenue. And just constantly devouring information as it comes your way. As you probably realize, it's 2020, and just about anything you ever wanted to know, for better or worse, is available on the internet. So you really can get a huge amount of exposure to almost anything you ever wanted from your living room. And as you get more into your career, and as you get a little more specified and hone in on a specific thing, whether it's clinical or market or industry or whatever you want to look at, you typically get more focused with the resources that are pertinent to your field, right? So a clinician will read a ton of journals, right, and journal articles, and they'll do journal reviews. And there might be industry bloggers that are out there that are talking about, what's new in biopharma or what's new in drug development or regulatory concerns. So that happens in every industry, and I have mine. And in my position, I tend to lean a lot more on the folks in legal and risk and financial modeling to help us map out a lot of what's going on with our strategy. In these interactions, you really try and not learn everything that there is that they do, but kind of glean some of that experience that they have, what they're looking at, some of the pearls that they're looking at. Every profession has these pearls. And over time, you typically are able to carry on a conversation a lot better with these folks. And they appreciate that as well, because that way it doesn't have to be like, explaining it to a toddler every single time I enter the room or something like that. It's really learning to bring clarity to the conversation, right? And like I said, all these conversations happen in big groups and with lots of members on each team, and everybody's kind of worrying about their angle. The most important thing that you can do is just bring a sense of clarity, bring a sense of focus, and be able to carry on that conversation. And finally, I do spend a lot of time reading, again, public information. For example, every large public company has to publish investor reports, presentations, annual reports. They do, investor day and healthcare day and whatever, and they have tons of analysts who will ask their executive questions about what they're doing. This is all public information. You can go on their investor relations websites, and you can typically find anything that you're looking for. It's kind of like a temperature check, what we do for the retail pharmacy market. So I watch a ton of these all day.
Oh, thanks, Ricky. I think, especially for our newer graduates, your advice on keeping current, expanding your knowledge, that helps you make better decisions in your own position, but also makes you more valuable to those around you in your company, because you can provide that information. And when you're the one who's most knowledgeable, that helps others and also makes you more valuable to the company. So let me ask the next question, which is kind of more personal, I guess, in your perspective and in the time that you've been with Costco. What are the things that personally excite you in the job or about pharmacy in general? And maybe those are things that our listeners will identify with as well.
Yeah. As we were told a lot in pharmacy school, which is 100% true, and it reigns supreme, pharmacy is a very diverse and very large profession, but it's also a small world, right? We always hear that a lot. And by very wide, and I know this is like a dichotomy there, what do I mean? It's wide because there's so many pharmacists employed in positions that probably aren't highlighted very much and probably aren't captured on employment reports. And obviously the largest share of pharmacist employment is in community and hospital and clinical. But there's a lot of pharmacists that I meet that have PharmD on their email tag or whatever, or RPH, and they are in insurers, they're in industry, they're at health plans. There's a ton in PBMs, and a lot of large companies have pharmacists in their benefits departments as administrators and benefit designers. So obviously, there's a tremendous need for pharmacists there. And I feel like that because they're kind of like one-off positions and they're not cookie cutter, that we might be easily categorized, kind of get left out in the description. But I know a lot of pharmacists that are employed in non-traditional fields, and a lot of these pharmacists bring a ton of knowledge and value to the companies that they're at. There's so much you can bring to the table with a pharmacy background. You're super analytical. typically type A. You're typically very, very detailed oriented and into the weeds when it comes to providing knowledge or providing advice. All of that has a measurable benefit to either the person you're doing work for or the end customer or the end patient. And as pharmacy undergoes this kind of very long-winded but dramatic change over the next couple of years, it's really obvious that it's making this pivot to service and quality and outcomes rather than product first. And in pharmacy, it's so many challenges to solve for, right? And that's what keeps it exciting for me and just about everybody else who works in pharmacy related fields.
Great. Well, you've kind of, I think, already you answered two questions there. One was what excites you, and also what are some of the opportunities for pharmacists out there? And I think you're a great example of someone who's gone into kind of a non-traditional opportunity. Definitely a lot more of those are available in the workplace these days. And I know that our students are well prepared for that. So maybe just to wrap up, I'll ask if you have any last minute advice for our students. We also have alumni who are viewing this and some faculty. So anything you want to say as we wrap up this interview?
Yeah, you know, definitely don't be afraid of a job that doesn't have the word pharmacist in it. Doesn't have to be there. It might not necessarily be exactly what you're looking for, but don't be afraid of looking at it just because it doesn't have the word pharmacist in the title. If you're ever looking for opportunities for where there's going to be employment, or you're thinking about, you know, what fields are going to be the ones that are growing, right? Look at where the revenue is, look at the share of revenue, and see where investments are being made. You know, typically when folks with deep pockets make investments, they're looking for a return on that investment. And if you just take a look at the companies that are being invested in, it kind of gives you a sense for a temperature check, right? For what's in demand and what's popular in the market. And you can always follow that because a lot of that's publicly disclosed and it's, you know, on news sites and all that stuff. As the profession changes, you're going to see a lot more creative new business models that aim to tackle these really mega big challenges, right? Like in pharmacy school, you learned one of the biggest costs in pharmacy that impacts patients is not adherence, right? By far, it's people not taking their medications on time as prescribed. And it was just always this nebulous problem, this big nebulous problem that had a huge dollar figure to it, a huge cost to the system that no companies really, they kind of did some things around the edges, but no company made it their only and singular mission to tackle that problem. Now you're starting to see some companies really take aim at that. And obviously when you're looking at a problem that big, there's going to be a lot of resources that are going to be devoted to it. And therefore there's going to be a lot of kind of metrics that are going to be designed to try and capture that. And if you think about what COVID has done, it's basically just hit the fast forward button on a lot of the healthcare professionals and changing the way that care is going to be delivered. I think the opportunities are clear, and it's going to be in non-traditional roles for the next 10 years.
Well, Dr. Lee, thank you. This has been a great interview. We covered a lot of ground. I think we talked about networking. We talked about mentorship and experience. We talked about expanding your knowledge base, staying current, and then a lot of the different opportunities that you've experienced, but also that you see for our upcoming or more recent graduates. So I really appreciate the time and thought that you've put into this. I think our audience is definitely going to benefit from this. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to meeting up with you next time I'm out in the Northwest, and certainly when you're back home in Chicago visiting, we'd like to see you come by the school as long as this whole pandemic is under control. So thanks, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.